Hey, it's the real you calling. Welcome home. What would your life look like if you stopped second guessing yourself, stopped playing small, and finally broke free from the cycles that have kept you stuck? Well, that's what the Ignite Momentum Practicum is all about. It's a 6 week transformational coaching experience designed to help you break through people pleasing, self doubt, and codependency once and for all. And here's the best part, you get to choose your path. You can matriculate through the one on one accelerator. It's private, high touch coaching, you and me one on one. Weekly breakthrough calls, a custom action plan, deep mindset work, and real time support to help you reclaim your power and rebuild your confidence. Option two is the group intensive. This is where transformation meets community. Weekly live sessions with a cohort of like-minded individuals, hot seat coaching, Q&A, bonus trainings, and a space where you're truly seen and supported without judgment. So whether you want personalized guidance or collective energy, the Ignite Momentum Practicum gives you the tools, structure, and support to stop circling the same patterns and start building unstoppable momentum. Ready to take the next step? Schedule your momentum call now at ignitingmomentum.co. That's ignitingmomentum.co. You'll find all the details there. You're not here to shrink, you're here to rise. Welcome back to Rising from the Shadows, the podcast where we are embarking on a journey of healing from trauma, reclaiming power, and thriving beyond the shadows of our past. I'm your host, Marlon Wesh. I'm a speaker and coach helping men who are recovering people pleasers and codependents reunite with themselves to live thriving lives. Today, I'm thrilled to bring you another conversation with my guest, Zac Zickgraf. Zac is a United States Marine Corps veteran and a practicing psychotherapist who believes in the importance of personal accountability, community, and recreation when it comes to mental health outcomes. Zac has a noted casual and candid approach to the therapeutic process, which is certainly a breath of fresh air. Zac, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So we were just talking right before I press record that we have some things in common. So we actually have two things in common, at least. We're both Marine Corps veterans, and we both have service animals. Your Dougal and my Coco. My dog is
Mhm.
over here sleeping. She's mad I didn't take her for her longer.
Mine's right over here sleeping too.
Yeah, so like I was saying before, I served 8 years between my active and reserve time, and I got out, went to college, and started my civilian career. Can you share a little bit of your story with us, pre-Marines, in the Marines, and post-Marine Corps?
Yeah, of course. So I was born and raised in a small township in Michigan called Shelby Township, and uh, parents were great, but we kind of had some tragedy along the way. My mom got sick when I was really young, misdiagnosed with emphysema. She actually had emphysema, but she was misdiagnosed with asthma when I was about 9. And the last few years of her life, which were those next 3 years, were really difficult. She was really sick, bedridden. Dad shut down his business to kind of help take care of her, and then she ultimately passed when I was 12. Um, Things were great before that, and then after that, it got really chaotic. Dad had a really hard time with maladaptive coping mechanisms, really dove into substance use, and then his best friend at the time moved in with us, and I actually ended up sharing a bedroom with that man for about 3 years, from about 13 to 16, before he moved out and then ultimately passed away later. But it was really, there was a lot of liberty,
Hmm.
like I could kind of do whatever I wanted. I had a lot of issues with substance use at the time and just like reckless behavior and really attention seeking, because I didn't really have any supervision. So um, the wheels kind of fell off when I was about 16, 17, and I realized like this is not going to work long term. Um, so I decided I needed to make a drastic lifestyle change, and that's when Homeboy and his Blues showed up at my school. I was like, who are you, dude? and he's like, I'm the better version of you, ultimately, and we shared some similar experiences, and eventually my man was like, hey, dude, like, why don't you sign up? And then I listened to the Marine Corps, I went in the entry program, and then 17 years old, right after I graduated high school with had a 1.8 GPA. I was failing all my classes. I'd actually been expelled prior to that. Uh, yeah, and then I went in the Marine Corps, man. And then that's kind of, there's a lot more to that. It was a lot of, a lot of like emotional neglect and some like verbal and emotional abuse from my dad's friend who I shared a room with. And, I don't know how deep you want to get into that childhood and adolescence stuff, but it was a really
Mm.
tumultuous time for me. I was really coping with a lot of drinking and substances and just getting in trouble, really just not living well.
Yeah, that seems to be it's funny, like, once you take off the uniform and you're around a smoke pit or something like that, you realize, how different you guys are and then how similar you are at the same time, like, everyone's stories.
Hmm.
It's, the Marine Corps did its job, what I needed it to do, and it's not like a big part of
Hmm.
my life at all at this point, but, it was definitely a trauma bonding situation, but at the same time, a little affirming to see a group of, in my case, I was at a Victor unit, so a group of guys that, um, came from all different walks of life, but we were all trying to live a better life to some degree. And so hearing a story
Yeah.
like yours, it's like, you hear countless stories like that when you're out in the field, around the smoke pit, or what have you. And there's such a misconception, I think, about the emotional intelligence of Marines, but I have found probably some of the deepest individuals in the Corps that I came across. I always say that some of the worst people I know are Marines, and some of the best people I know are Marines. Um, um,
I would absolutely
right?
agree with that. Straight, yeah.
Um, in your self introduction on your TikTok page, you mentioned that you believe in the power of resilience, um, recreation, and relationships on how they affect mental health outcomes, and that you said that they were a massive contributing factor in your own mental health recovery. How do you view those three factors relationship to mental health, and how can we best leverage them in our own lives?
Yeah, so resilience is, if we were to give a definition to it, it's our ability to return to baseline after some sort of stressor, right? So when I think about resilience, it's not just like this thing that we can go out and get without working hard for it. Some of us who have been exposed to adversity early on or in adulthood or whatever stage had the opportunity to gain resilience, but ultimately, um, I think if you're not exposed to those kind of circumstances, it requires intentional effort, right? Putting ourselves in healthy but difficult situations in order to increase our ability to manage stress and return to baseline, right? And there's a fellow named Michael Easter who I'm a big fan of who wrote a couple books. One of them is called Scarcity Brain, and the other one's called The Comfort Crisis. And he's the one that kind of repopularized rucking as a form of like exercise and as good for your mental health as well. And he talks about doing things that are difficult, right? He's got this whole Substack where he talks about the two percenters, right? And that was based off a study that he found where presented with the opportunity to take an escalator, only 2% of people took the stairs,
Mm.
right? And so he talks about a lot of incorporating these manageable discomforts in our day-to-day life in order to increase resilience, right? And ultimately, like there's the physical health benefits as well, but we'd be amiss to say they're not all interwoven, right? And I believe in doing hard things, and I believe in doing hard things on purpose. And the research would substantiate that from what I've witnessed. And I believe that if we're not feeling resilient, we need to start working at it. Right? It's like working hard. And there's a lot of, I have like my Mount Rushmore of mental health and wellness, professionals that I kind of pull a lot of my information from and that fuel a lot of it. None of this is really like an
Hmm.
original idea,
Hmm.
you know. I have my own spin on some things, um, and I kind of manipulate certain things to where I think it's appropriate for me to use, and then for individuals to use as well. But ultimately, like, resilience comes from doing hard things. And if we've been through hard things and we found that we cannot get through it in a healthy way, then we need to go back and address those, right? So we're talking about trauma, right? So if we had a maladaptive response to trauma, whether that's PTSD or just symptoms of post-traumatic stress, right? Because there's also an abundance of other ways we can process trauma without having it be diagnosable. Um, so we need to go back and rework that. Dr. James Hollis, he did a feature on the Huberman Lab podcast where he said we have to write a better story than the one we were
Mm.
given, right? And that quote's just an
Yeah.
absolute
Yeah.
banger. It's like because we get resilience, even though we may have responded unhealthily to a certain circumstance we've been exposed to. If we go back and we get right with that, we can absolutely develop
Yeah.
resilience. So, so that's the resilience piece. Dude, the people in my life saved my life. Um, Even when I went in the Marine Corps, and the first half of my Marine Corps experience, I had terrible leadership, right? And it was just a bunch of fellows I didn't respect and I didn't feel safe around. And that's difficult when you're deploying over the Middle
Hmm.
East. And when I came back, I'm very thankful that I had a corrective experience because I went into another platoon that was going on an expeditionary deployment. And those guys were
Hmm.
amazing, and they kind of helped to recreate that Marine Corps camaraderie experience for me. And it was then I started noticing the impact that relationships had
Mm.
on my
Yeah.
life, because I spent the majority of my childhood and adolescence very lonely and very isolated and feeling like, and I mean, I'll be as candid and vulnerable as you're willing to
Oh,
allow me to
please.
be, right? But
This is
I,
definitely a place for that. Go ahead.
yeah, yeah, I remember it, like when I was very early on in my early adolescence, I remember thinking like, if I died, who would come to my
Yeah.
funeral,
I've had the
you
same
know?
thoughts.
And that's
Yeah.
gnarly shit, dude. Like part of the language, but it's nobody should have to experience that. So I started noticing the impact that relationships had, and then I was also kind of dealing with some stuff. My substance use, my drinking got way out of control, and I ended up getting a DUI in my last year in the Marine Corps. I blew a .31, and it was just like a stupid. I was going through the main gate on
Yeah.
Camp Pendleton, and and that was like rock bottom, dude. I did not think I was going to be able to recover from that, but due to the circumstances of that incident, I found myself in a community of people who experienced similar issues and had a solution, right? And then they diligently showed up in my life and led by example and put their hand out to me. It was like the first time in my life that I truly felt seen. And that was the proponent or the catalyst rather that just totally changed the trajectory of my life. Right. They eased my Marine Corps transition to civilian life. They encouraged me to go back to school and like find passion and helped introduce me to like a principled way of living. I recognize that a lot of my approach in therapy is acceptance and commitment
Mhm.
therapy, right? Which is like find out what your values are, um, and commit yourself to those, right? And then kind of move through life like water. And these people showed me how to do that independent of therapy, right? And um, they also encouraged me to go back to therapy, and then I got a tremendous amount of help from various sources of mental health, and that yeah. So the relationships changed my life. Even still today, like I have a very strong network of people that know just about everything about me. And one of the reasons that um, I have such a casual approach to clinical is because it's just important. I believe in the human elements of what we do, right? In the mental health and wellness and resilience space. It's like my wife knows the same me that you know now, and that my clients know, and that my coworkers know, my friends know. Like it's all the same. And I wouldn't be able to do that without having really good
Mhm.
people in my life. And so that's kind of the relationships. There's I can get a lot more into like the nuance of why the relationships are important at a mental health level, but that's just kind of my experience in that domain. Um, and then recreation, dude, like we need to do shit
Yeah.
with our time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like we cannot just like sit around and scroll on our phone and stay inside, right? And to kind of bring all of that together. Well, before that, if I may, I always tell like people that I work with and my friends that if you meet somebody and if you know their super personal, like political or religious beliefs in the first 5 minutes, then you need to go out and get a
Mhm.
personality. And I actually say that to a lot of people because we focus a lot on these things that aren't really relevant to like how we choose to live in a day to day, right? We need to get hobbies, right? We need to read some books.
Yeah.
We need to like develop a sense of self independent of things that are really kind of emotionally charged, and there's a place for that that's really important. But it's like there has to be more to me, like you said, um, than the Marine
Mhm.
Corps
Mhm.
veteran, right? And I worked in the VA for a couple of years, so this like identity building piece was super important. And I think recreation is how we do
Yeah.
that, because not everyone's going to find a passion that they can make a career out of. Some people just need to find something that keeps them secure enough to do the
Yeah,
things they're
for sure.
passionate about. That's
For sure.
tolerable, right? And some of us are a little bit more fortunate that like I love this stuff, and I breathe and like really live for this kind of stuff. But recreation is important. We need to fill our time and to kind of bring them all together, the resilience, the relationships, and the recreation piece. I just came back 2 days ago from what was like my bachelor party trip, and me and a few of the fellows who I'm tremendously close with went up to Yellowstone and Grand Teton
Nice.
National Park, and a couple of us attempted to summit the Middle Teton, and we did not succeed. But it was, oh man, it was the hardest thing I've ever done. And I like to do really big hikes and kind of things like that, and like I tackle mountains and stuff like that. And it was like we had the resilience piece of like trying to do something that I didn't know if I was going to be able to accomplish. Right? I was like, I don't know if never summited something over 12,000 feet. That was new. And I wasn't as prepared as I would have liked to have been, right? So there's a resilience
Yeah.
component to that, right? The recreation of getting outside with the homies and like having a great time, right? And really like engaging with one another. And then the relationships, right? Just being around people that I trust in my life, right? And so I think those three things, they're not the only things. It's not like the secret three things that'll change your life, right? But I think that in my journey and the notes that I've taken along the way, those are the three things that have probably had the most profound
Mm.
impact.
Coming from a marketing background, I love the number three. It's really good for marketing. One of the things I discovered about myself was like I need three things in my life. Um, I need to create, connect, and rest, and then like and like that cycles for me.
Yeah.
So that definitely resonates with the the resilience relationship and recreation. So much of what you said resonate, and I have like a million other questions I have from just the couple of minutes you were just talking there. Um, One, I had kind of like the reverse experience of you. In my early part of my career, I had amazing um, small unit leadership. I will never forget. Is it Oprah? Oprah used to quote this. She actually misquoted it, but the sentiment stands from Maya Angelou, where she has a poem talking about. I think it's called the something or the faith of my grandmothers or something. But essentially, the sentiment was how we are all standing on the shoulders of like our ancestors and what have you. And the phrase is
Mhm.
something like I like when I walk in a room, I don't come as one, I come as 10,000. And so I've
I
developed.
love that.
Isn't it
That's
so
so
cool?
cool.
So I developed like an actual written list where throughout all the periods of my life, these people that have shown up for me, and I call that my 10,000 list. One of them being was the first NCO that I worked with, Sergeant Hartman, who was, to this day is probably the smartest guy that I've ever known. Like he finished. If you're listening to this and you've got a story to tell, whether it's your personal story of healing and reclaiming your voice or rising from rock bottom, or you're a professional with powerful insight into trauma, identity, resilience, or transformation, then I want to hear from you. Rising from the Shadows is more than just a podcast. It's a space where truth is honored, power is reclaimed, and stories heal. If you have something to share that could empower others to stop shrinking and start rising, I'd love for you to apply to be a guest on the show. Just head to tellmystory.risingfromtheshadows.com to submit your application. Let's rise together, one voice, one breakthrough, one story at a time. If you're listening to this and you've got a story to tell, whether it's your personal story of healing and reclaiming your voice or rising from rock bottom, or you're a professional with powerful insight into trauma, identity, resilience, or transformation, then I want to hear from you. Rising from the Shadows is more than just a podcast. It's a space where truth is honored, power is reclaimed, and stories heal. If you have something to share that could empower others to stop shrinking and start rising, I'd love for you to apply to be a guest on the show. Just head to tellmystory.risingfromtheshadows.com while he was serving. Got out, worked for TCOM, I think, for a little bit, and then transitioned and did other like um, military adjacent educational programming stuff.
Right.
And but just such a solid guy. He was like the grumpiest person you've ever met, but he was so kind. Like he said like three words when he woke up if he didn't have his coffee or whatever. But I spent like hours and hours in the smoke pit with that guy, and he just was extremely
Mhm.
affirming. Both him and his wife Meredith. He affectionately calls her Waffle, and so the joke I would call her Mrs. Waffle. But there were times where like I essentially was homeless, and I just like crashed on their couch for weeks and weeks on end. And he fed me, he spoke with me, affirmed me, helped get me resources. Just a great, 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 great guy. Looked out for us, but very much um, was an NCO, right? He wasn't like buddy buddy, like he was,
Mhm.
but he wasn't like he was. I get emotional every time talking about him. He was just like such a solid, solid, solid guy. Towards the end, right before I EAS, I had horrible leadership, horrible, just like very reactive leadership. It's just like, what does my boss think? It's like, oh, the battalion commander thinks it's
Mhm.
good, blah, blah, blah. And then like screwed us over in order to, I don't know, get better fit reps. So that was it. So that contrast, like, I'm so glad I got that good experience in the beginning because
Mhm.
I know when I got out the Marine Corps, it was time for me to go. And I probably would have
Yeah.
stayed longer than I should have if it was like the reverse.
Mhm.
Um, but the resilience part that also like um, really resonates. When I give a speech, I in my bio that I have people read, I refer to myself as being delusionally optimistic, and I think that's my other way of saying
Mhm.
resilience. I and then what you said about like we have to write a different story, that's the way I view life. And I always say to myself, I was like when things get really hard, I talk to the universe, I call it God. I'm like, damn, like how much better is my story? Does my story need to get before I get out of this? Right? Like I'm always thinking, like, wow, this is like a better part of my story. The story's it's getting
Yeah.
more crazy, and then he overcame all of this. Um, but that's like I
Mhm.
live in the your story's written mindset, and it's truly been the key to my resilience. So that resonates a lot. Um, the relationship part for me is still coming as somebody who somewhat recently is on the other end of surviving a narcissistic abuse. relationship, um,
Mm,
and which now I realize began even before my romantic one, in other areas of my life. My social circle is recently purged, so I'm missing part of that. The relationship part that I had a little bit in the Marine Corps, but I can totally see because I'm thinking about Sergeant Hartman and his effect on my life. Like, I probably wouldn't have gone to college if it wasn't for him.
mm.
He was just very, education driven. And, turns out, more than 14 years later, I have my bachelor's, I have my MBA, I'm working on another master's right now. And it's like one of the best things that I've ever done. And because of this guy. So that relationship part, um, really spoke to me. Um, like I was just saying a little bit earlier. So I'm a recovering people pleaser and codependent. That's how I refer to me. And one of the big consequences of those people pleasing traits was that I allowed unhealthy people access to me, because I was afraid of saying no. What message do you have for people like myself who have grown enough to know that something needs to change with their inner circle, but maybe they're afraid of the unknown that comes with creating space between yourself and unhealthy individuals, especially if they've been in your life for a long time?
I appreciate you sharing that with me. And also had very much people pleasing tendencies for a very long time. And the root of it was, you know, when I talk about relationships, the most important one we have is with
Yeah.
ourselves, right? If that's not right, none of them will be right. And, I think about my experience people pleasing, and it was always to try to validate some part of me, right? That felt like it was missing the attention or
Mhm.
affection or just seeking some sort of external information that would support this idea that I'm actually supposed to be here, right? And as my mental health started to decline and I started seeking lower companions, I realized I was like scraping the bottom of the barrel for
Yeah.
validation, right? And there's this guy, Alex Hormozy, that talks, one of the quotes that he says like a million times, and I love it. They use it all the time. It's, we don't overcome self doubt by shouting affirmations in the mirror. We do it by creating an undeniable stack of proof that we are who
I
we
love
say we
that.
are,
I love that.
right? And I love that, right? And so it's not, there's no amount of like me looking in the mirror, and this is only true for me, right? And people who might relate to me. This is not, none of what I say is the
Mhm.
only way to go about this, right? It's just been my path, but I cannot look at myself in the mirror and say, "I love you. You're amazing. You're handsome." All this crap, right? If I'm not,
Is there
and
a
then like
problem with me? I'm
not
like,
go
damn,
out
you
and
are handsome to myself.
yeah, you're like, "Damn, I got this." Right? But it's and it's just like, and really, unless I'm living well, man, and unless I'm like proving that to myself through my behavior, which is very acceptance and commitment therapy oriented, uh, I'm not going to feel good about myself. So when it comes to get back to your question, purging those unhealthy and whatever relationships that are not serving you well anymore, um, the main thing to know is that it's going to
Yeah.
suck. It's gonna suck, dude. And there's no way to get around the sensation of sitting there thinking like I'd rather have somebody unhealthy in my life than nobody at all right now. And that is like a wildly painful thing. Um, but that's part of the commitment piece, right? Is like committing myself to this idea of who I want to be. And to be able to prove that to myself, I have to not engage with people that are not serving me
Mm.
well anymore. But it's just not, because when we effectively clear our life of unhealthy people, we go through a withdrawal, man. I mean, it could be like akin to substances in some kind of way, and I'm not invalidating substances and all that, but it's reminiscent of like sitting there going through the contact list and thinking like, I know they're around, I know they'll answer, right? And having this idea of people just being there for you when times are hard, and this like false sense of loyalty to that because you can have people who will sit there and hold space for you who are still not
Yeah.
healthy people.
Yeah.
You know, it's like there's just misery loves company, right? So it's like there's people who will share that pain with you that but that doesn't mean that they should be in your life, right? If they're not representative of the life you're trying to
Mhm.
create. So it starts with building our relationship with ourselves and then really kind of like appreciate this, like embracing the suck, you know, and because it's
Yeah.
gonna suck, and like the whole yeah. But it's one of the hardest things, man, because we're social beings and it's natural to seek validation from our environment, but where it becomes maladaptive is when we take the wrong pieces of information and like information from unhelpful sources and start determining our sense of self based off of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Wow.
Yeah.
We there's so much synergy between not only the what we think but the language that we use. Um the it's gonna suck. That has been I think for a lot of people when they hear something like that, it may sound discouraging, but for me, that phrase is probably one of the most encouraging phrases because it's like, all right, good. Like, I get it. So, like, I should not expect that there should be anything pleasant about this. Got it. So, that's like one
Hmm.
part of, mental energy I don't have to use on. Like, now it's about like getting through this. And for me, uh, gosh, um, when you're bored one day and you just need to listen to something, uh, if you go on my website, I have a talk that I give, and I talk about the what I call the 5 epiphanies to essentially living the life that you want. And the most important one is my last one, which is being able to accept negative consequences. And
Hmm.
like that was the key to me being a badass because, like, I think
I
most
love that.
people walk through this world expecting that you're going to cower under the same pressure that they cower under daily, and when you just
Hmm.
don't, like, you can't be controlled. You just simply can't be controlled
Yeah.
because you know it's going to suck, but it's standing in the way of your ultimate objective.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, this is the price I pay for the life I want. And it has been mind changing for me. You were going to say something
Hmm.
just now.
Yeah, I was just gonna add to that. I didn't want to interject though, but it's like um, not even like negative consequences, but
Yeah, yeah,
unpleasant consequences is how I would reframe that. Because it's like, you know, because something's unpleasant doesn't mean it's a
yeah. I
bad
love
thing,
that reframing. Yeah.
right? And that kind of goes into the resilience piece too, right? Is being able to reframe things as like, just because this sucks doesn't mean that this is a bad thing
Hmm.
or negative, right? It's just not what I want to experience right now, which who
Right,
wants to experience discomfort
right.
at any
Training
time,
for a marathon sucks, but
right?
it's not necessarily a bad
Yeah,
thing. Um,
absolutely.
Um, for most of my life, I operated under the assumption that there was something wrong with me and like everyone else was normal. I talk about my story in earlier episodes.
Hmm.
I grew up, my family of origin was extremely abusive, physically, emotionally, sexually. I was raised in a religious cult, very isolated from, the real world. And so when, I turned 18, left my parents' house and started moving in the world, I was just operating like everyone else is normal. I'm the one that's not normal. So if I wanted to reach that level, that same level of normalcy that everyone else has, I had to be more like them. So
Hmm.
I would, this really led me to just ignoring my intuition and in adopting other people's, advice, commentary, more than was reasonable for someone to do. And after reconnecting with my inner wisdom, as I call it, a noted change for me was that the level I cared I had about other people's opinions dropped significantly. And you share some thoughts about this in one of your videos. What's the healthy balance that you've observed with caring about people's opinions and the degree it matters to a person that's healing?
First, I want to like acknowledge the information that you shared and say thank you for sharing that. Right. That's, and I know you said you shared that on a public space before, but it's I appreciate the vulnerability, right? And that's how people connect. Um, and there's parts of me that relate to this idea of what do I need to do to not be broken, right? And I remember a big way that I would go about that is actually like replicating other people's appearance, right? Because I felt so alone. And um, I remember like thinking like if I had that pair of shoes, I would like people would treat me the same way,
Let me
right? And I
interject real
remember
quick
like,
to give you
oh,
something
yeah,
to
go ahead.
laugh at. You
Mhm.
have no idea how significant the movie Hitch was in my life. Like, like I
Ah,
swear to God, I was like, okay, okay, I don't want to be Albert Brenneman. I want to be like Hitch, and like literally, the shirt, the unbuttoned, the untucked shirt with the jacket
yes,
and everything. It
yes,
changed my my fashion and stuff like that. Like
yeah.
that's such a relatable experience. But continue.
Oh man, yeah. And I remember like there was, when I was in school, Supras were really popular, the high tops, and I was definitely like an emo kid. And there was this one guy who will remain nameless, but he was like one of the cool guys, right? And he had this like one pair of Supras, and I was so like inconsequential that I thought like if I got those, like he wouldn't notice. And I ended up getting those shoes, and he actually called me out on it. And I was like, it was one of the most
Damn.
devastating days
Yeah.
of my life, dude. And I was like, oh man. And just that feeling of like, oh, I've been caught, right? And the sensation of like, if they
I've been
really
caught.
knew who I was,
That's
then
so real.
yeah, like if they really knew who I was, I wouldn't be accepted, right? So that's why and if you were to take photos of me at various stages of my life, even close in proximity in time, you're looking at completely different people, right? Just because I had zero sense of self. And once we get over that, we get right with ourselves, and we finally take some agency um, over how we view ourselves. That idea, and I kind of mentioned it earlier about trusted sources of information, right? Like we have to care what people think. If we don't, we will not
Mhm,
succeed
mhm.
in this world, right? But it's where we're getting our information from, right? And I think I mentioned this in the video, if it's the same one you were referencing, but it's like if some asshole, like out on the street doesn't like the way that I talk or present myself or my opinion on something, I always have to do a little reflection, right? But I have to ask myself, is this a me issue or is
Mhm.
that an issue, right? Because if I go out and if I'm having a bad day and if I treat the gas station attendant poorly, right, I have to
Yeah.
like check that and go back and make right of that, right? But if they treat me poorly, and if I do my quick little
Yeah.
star check inventory, and I'm like, all right, did that have anything to do with me? Like, is this my problem? And in this community that I'm a part of, there's a wonderful saying, and it's like it's so hard to stomach, but it's like other people's opinions of me are
Yeah.
none of my business,
Yeah.
right? It's just not my business, not my problem, right? However, trusted sources of information are the people who know us, who know our values, and know what we represent, and who are willing to keep us accountable, right? So if I go and say something that I think is direct, right, but somebody interprets it poorly, um, and then if my wife substantiates that, and they're like, you know what, you did come off across a
Mhm.
little poorly, right? Like, and that's not really aligned with your value of kindness. That's a trusted source, man. And I have to check that through my filter and be like, you know what, I was this person an amends or an apology, right? And if I am engaging in some kind of behavior and one of my closest homies comes up to me and he's like, dude, like, you might want to, like, I don't think you'd approve of that, right? And it's like what they're really doing is it's not even their assessment of whether I'm right or wrong in any particular situation. It's them holding up
Yeah.
the mirror and saying, would you be right with you? Would your higher self approve of this behavior, this conduct,
Yeah.
this attitude, or whatever, right? So when it comes to caring about what people think, care about what people think with regard to how they reflect what you would think
Mhm.
about you, if
Yeah,
that makes
yeah,
sense. Right? Like, is this in alignment with who you want to be, with your values and the life that you've created? Whereas everybody else can kind of get
yeah,
bent, you know? It's like, we don't want to be a prick to people, but ultimately, like, other people's opinions are
yeah,
not my
yeah. If this podcast speaks to you, if you're on the path of healing, reclaiming your voice, or just trying to piece together who you really are after surviving the unthinkable, I want to invite you into a space where you don't have to do it alone. Join our Facebook group created for survivors, cycle breakers, and people rebuilding themselves from the inside out. In there, we go deeper. Weekly prompts, live streams, raw conversations, and a whole lot of people who just get it. No pretending, no pressure, just truth, growth, and community. Search Rising from the Shadows, The Path to Reclaiming You on Facebook, or hit the link in the show notes to join the
Another
community.
way that I started thinking about it was like I don't care about the opinion of people who aren't on the same journey as I am. And the journey, and I would say
Mhm,
the overarching theme of the journey that I am is I would call it a journey of courage. I don't care about people's opinions who are not operating in courage, like period. I remember the
mhm,
first time that I really thought about this was when I was building my business. Um, I was building a financial planning business right when the pandemic started. It wasn't on purpose, it just happened to be. So it was like, what a great time to start talking to people about money when they don't have any. Um, and
yeah,
um, and I could not get clients for the life of me. And then I did uh, some research, some soul searching, and I'm like, I'm talking about things that I want to talk about. What is it that people care about?
mhm,
And it turned out that like, oh, people investing is a nice idea, right? Like theoretically, people like the idea, but retirement feels so far in the future. It's not a big enough pain point unless you're like 10, 15 years from retirement, right? I said, what is
mhm,
something that people have to do? And I'm like, oh, people have to file their taxes. So I did some more research on that. And it's like, and that was the thing that started getting me clients. I decided to start doing taxes for my clients and then also, managing their finances. I remember um, having dinner with my former in-laws, and I was telling my father-in-law like my discovery, and then he was like, "Why would like people let you do their taxes?" And I'm like, my master's degree concentration is in taxation, and he had like reason after reason why like I shouldn't be doing people's taxes. And I'm like, the fuck is
mhm,
going on here? You know, like
yeah,
like why are you having this reaction? I to
mm,
this day I don't know what that was
yeah,
about. All I know
that's
is when I
peculiar.
switched
Yeah,
from what I was doing before to what I was doing then, I was onboarding on a slow month, 4 clients a month. On some months, 8 clients
mm,
a month. So I knew like the evidence was there that I was doing the right thing. I
yeah,
had the training to do it. I was like registered as a preparer with the IRS. So I don't know where that came from. Um, but all I
mhm,
know was that his path, and he's a very successful businessman himself. His path, um, we didn't have the same. He was very much a um, conservative in his approach to doing things, just kind of like couching his bets and making sure everything made sense. And
sure,
um, and I think that works for a lot of people, but um, for me, I've always felt that I got more data with like big decisions than just like incremental ones,
mhm,
and that would speed up like my progress. So even if it failed, it's like, okay, I got a massive amount of data now that tells me why this isn't
yeah,
working, and I have no questions
mhm,
about if I could have made it work because I did this big thing. Um,
mhm,
and I realized in different advice that I would get from different people, like I don't respect the way how you show up in your marriage. I certainly don't want your
mhm,
advice about my marriage. You know, these are my
Yeah.
values when it comes to partnerships. You don't display that, so I don't care. This is my views when it comes to child rearing, and you have this other, like, I don't care because my value is is treating my children
Yeah.
like humans, not a reflection of myself. So if you're like, oh, respect, respect,
Mhm.
respect, I'm like, dude, he's 2 years old. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. Can I share an
Yes,
experience
please.
with you that's like really perfectly aligned with this? So I had a mentor before I met, or like at the beginning of my relationship with my wife now. Prior to that, I had been single for a good many years, right? Partly by choice, partly by circumstance. I was just kind of getting right and doing my thing, right? And when her and I got together, I had a very like strict morning routine, right? I'd wake up, I'd do my spiritual practice and my reading and my writing, and I needed like total silence, right? Like space to just do my thing. And and it was like something that my mentor imparted on me, like the importance of
Hmm.
routine and like a spiritual practice. And when her and I got together, we started like staying at each other's places. I would notice that when I would stay at her place, he is like the wake up, ready to go, super happy, like the exact opposite of me, right? Like where I'm like, I need like an hour to like get right
Hmm.
with the universe before I go and like be happy, right? And she just wakes up and like she's all bouncy and stuff. And I remember it was interfering with my practice, right? And I was like super strict and I didn't know how to like address that. So I go to my mentor who had just been divorced and was in a new relationship. And I asked him, I was like, hey man, how do I approach this? And he's like, well, you know what I tell my new partner is I tell her I don't want to see you for the first 2 hours of the day. I gotta like do my thing. It's how I keep right with myself, like I just need total, like space. Like please do not bother me in the morning. I'm not pleasant in the morning. And I was like, it was a little bit more like intense than that, right? But I was like, okay, I'll try that. So I go to her, and mind you, we're staying in her place
Hmm.
at the time. And I tried this approach, and I was like, I can't see it for the first hour, right? And like, I need to do my thing. Like, I'm not stoked in the morning, blah, blah, blah. And this was like a good, 4 or 5, probably 5 years ago now. And she just looked at me and she goes, well, then get out. Like you want your routine? Go outside. This is my place, And she's like, I'm who I am, and like, sure, you need permission to be who you need to be, but like, if you want space to go outside, I was like, oh shit, like it wasn't I planned it, and it was one of those things where the information that I had received was not from a source that had the kind of experience
Hmm.
that I
Hmm.
wanted.
Hmm.
Right. It was like a so I needed to be more intentional about where I was receiving information for each domain. Right. It's like if you want financial advice, go to somebody who's locked in. Right. If you want relationship advice, they gotta be
Hmm.
locked in too. You know.
That I'm so glad you brought that
So
up because that is a perfect segue to my next question about boundaries. So I think two weekends ago I was having dinner with a friend of mine, and we were discussing like dating, relationships, and boundaries. Like I said, because being a survivor of narcissistic abuse, both from my family of origin and romantic relationship, I was just sharing how my number one indicator of whether a situation was good for me or not was how I felt in my own body and how I felt about myself when I was with a potential romantic partner. Not so much how I felt about
mhm,
that potential partner. At this point in my life, my intuition is pretty locked on. And it doesn't take much for me to assess a situation. That might be part of the Marine Corps training, it might be a little bit of hypervigilance or what have you, but
mhm,
I go through data fairly quickly. And
mhm,
Now this is where we started having our like back and forth debate. So for me, I believe my boundaries make me open to people and relationships because they give me confidence that um, at any given moment, if they're violated, I know how to, and more importantly, I know that I will protect myself by enforcing them. And this allows me to
mhm,
be present and relax. Now, my friend's position was that my boundaries were too rigid and weren't giving people a fair chance. Um, what your wife said to you, for me, is a perfect example of her enforcing healthy boundaries. It's like, yeah, I'm not telling you don't meditate, but
Yeah.
get the fuck out of my house if you want to do this, because in the morning I'm full of
Yes.
joy, right?
Yes.
Can you clear up for
Yeah.
us like what boundaries are, who they're for, and how do they work in practice?
I love boundaries, man. Boundaries boundaries are absolutely like you said. They're the tools that give us agency over our relationships, right? Whether they're professional, personal, romantic, what have you. Like we need to believe we have some say over what's going on and where we choose to allocate our attention and our time. And boundaries are a great way to ensure that the guardrails are up and that our relationships are staying in alignment with our core values, right? And what we expect out of ourselves and the people in our lives. And the thing is, though, is like boundaries are not for other people, man. They're for us. Like when I set a boundary with someone, like when I say that, hey, this is a line in the sand that, I don't appreciate that behavior. It's not in alignment with who I'm trying to be, right? Or the kind of lifestyle I'm trying to have. If they cross that, that's that's for me to assess, right? I can bring it, and not to say like anytime somebody crosses the boundary ever, um, it's like okay,
Right.
bye right? Like there's more. It's more complex than that. Um, but first, like boundaries, they don't always have to be verbal,
Right. That's what I
right?
was
It
saying. Like, you don't even
depends
have
on
to
the depth.
communicate your boundaries to
Yeah,
somebody because it's about what you would do, right?
yeah, yeah, and it's about the depth of the
Sure.
relationship too, right? Because like if we don't give people the chance to do the right thing, they're not going to be able to do
Mhm.
the right thing, right? A buddy of mine once told me he was communicating with his partner, and he was like, "You got to give me the chance to do the right thing, right? You can't just expect me to read your mind and know your boundaries unless you vocalize them, right? Because there's some things like professional boundaries, right? We can be in a work environment and ethically, maybe it's not aligned with who we're trying to be. We don't have to like tell
Mhm,
them
mhm,
that.
mhm.
It's like that's our own boundary to make sure we're staying on our path. But the important people in our life, setting a boundary to saying like, hey, I don't appreciate it when you raise your voice, right? That's a serious boundary for me. This is why, right? I believe that when we start raising our voices during a debate or a discussion, um, we lose sense of like the other person, right? And it's super important for me to maintain respect for
Mhm.
the other person, and I can't do that when I'm
Yeah.
yelling at them, right? So then, if they cross that boundary, you have a couple options, right? You can say like, "Hey, you did the thing." I know that this is maybe they grew up in a very domestically violent home, right? And that's all they've ever known. Like, hey, you need to work on it because there's other things that we align on, right? But if you don't work on that, I got to do
Yeah.
something, right? And it's not, it's like what is boundary but like a non-violent threat, right? It's like, and it's in the pursuit of
Mhm.
self-preservation, right? Because, and I'm not saying like anytime somebody crosses the boundary, they're going to catch a fade. Like that's not the point at all, right? But I might need to remove myself from the situation, right? Because it's like if you diligently work on this thing and you really try not to cross a boundary and it happens again, but you make right of it and actually
Yeah.
make amends, it's like it
Right.
shows growth
I
and
mean,
it shows
that's
intention and it
humanity.
shows that you do respect the boundary. Yeah, yeah, right. Because we're all human too, right? Like we're gonna screw up and we're gonna make mistakes, but as long as we're being intentional about it, like ultimately it's for each person to decide what
Yeah.
their boundaries are. There might be some that are like like we can recover from this, right? If you work on it. Other people, same situation, might not be able to recover. It's too strong of a
Mhm.
boundary for them, right? And they're both valid, right? So it's like ultimately they're the guardrails that keep us in
Yeah.
alignment, right? And especially with our relationships, keep our relationships in a way that serve our spirit well, right? Not like deal friends, like serve our bank account well, right? Or serve our
Mhm.
ego well, but like to serve our spirit well. And that's kind of, and we need boundaries
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
ourselves too, right? And all that is self-management. So boundaries, yeah, they're the guardrails, man. That's ultimately
I love
they're
that,
for
and
us.
I love um, the clarity of how it's like different for different people. You know, based on my personal experiences, like I just don't. Uh, I don't do gaslighting. And I think sometimes people's
Mhm.
reactive, like if they feel attacked, they reactively be like, hey, it's not, and they can possibly like recover from that and be like, damn, yeah, you were right or whatever. But because of like what I've gone
Mhm.
through, like I want somebody whose natural inclination is to self reflect, not to attack. And I know that person exists somewhere. So, like, for me, that's just like not
Yeah.
something I can put up with. I was interviewing, uh, another therapist a couple weeks back, Samantha Saunders, and and in a similar question, her example, I forgot what the example was exactly, but what sticks in my mind is she was like, if I say this one time, and then if I say this two times, and I say this three times, and I was like, damn, you're a lot more generous than I am. Like that was my response.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
but people have different tolerance level, and I certainly used to feel that boundaries was me saying like, hey, this is bothering me, please stop. And I think that's why I stayed in situations way longer than I should have, because I didn't realize that it was really supposed to be geared to me. Like, what are you going to do if somebody doesn't listen to you about what's important to you? What are you going to do now? And then the other part was, because I grew up with so little love in my life, I had this incredible scarcity mindset about what was available to me. And a major development in my healing journey with people pleasing was when I realized that it came from a big part of it came from my scarcity mindset. So the idea that this is
Mhm.
as good as it's going to get, um, which effectively
Yeah.
just shut down my ability to see the possibility of a better future. How can people like myself um, reframe our fear of loss that so often keeps us stuck so we can build momentum towards a life worth living?
Sure. Another bit about the boundaries, and then I'll transition into that, is boundaries have to, they demand action if they're crossed, right? Because if you look at behaviorism, right, an environment that supports the behavior will thrive,
Mm,
right? So if I draw the line and you cross it, and I draw the line and you cross it, that's not a boundary, right? It's an opinion, right? Or it's a preference. But a boundary, if we continually allow people to cross our boundaries, then we are effectively supporting the behavior. We're encouraging it. And we're saying that this boundary doesn't actually mean
mhm,
anything, right? And when it comes to overcoming the fear of like actually enforcing our boundaries, I think was the prompt, um, in pursuit of this greater life that we can see for ourselves. There's a buddy of mine gave me a quote. I don't know where he got it, but it kind of slaps. It's about change, and he says change begins when our circumstances deteriorate faster than we can lower our standards. Right, and when we think about what our standards are for ourselves, it requires a choice, like it demands a choice, because we don't just wake up one day and back to the shouting affirmations in the mirror and creating evidence. You don't just say like, "Oh, I'm that
mhm.
guy today," right? Like, and feel that way. Like a big part of growing and healing is faking it until you make it. And that's not
Yeah.
inauthenticity, right? It's pursuit
Mm,
and it's
yeah.
diligence, right? It's saying that there's this guy that maybe I could be one day, right? And not in terms of like the monetary or it could even be that kind of stuff too, but mainly the way we feel about ourselves. But it's going to take a lot of work to get there, and the journey's going to suck, right? And the fear is that we aren't going to be deserving, right? And that it's not going to work out, and we're going to fail in our pursuit of a higher self, right? Which kind of brings me to the topic of, and this will ultimately answer how to get rid of fear, right? Whenever I ask people about happiness, and happiness is a topic that I'm super fascinated with. There's a guy, Dr. Arthur Brooks, who's a social scientist who, you mentioned Oprah earlier. He actually co-authored a book with Oprah called "Build the Life You Want: The Art and Science of Getting Happier." I'm going to mix those up, but but he talks a lot about happiness with respect to enjoyment, satisfaction, and meaning. And there's a whole tangent I can go about that, which we may get into later, maybe not. But when we are taking these steps to walk toward a better future, right? We have to ask ourselves, are we deserving of happiness? What is deserving? It's merit,
Mm,
right? How does one become deserving of happiness? Like happiness is this really obscure thing, right? So let's take it to something a little bit more tangible, health, right? And I'll always ask people, is everybody inherently deserving of health? And the usual answer is yes, right? Because we would like to believe so. And I always rebuttal with, well, opportunity for health, sure, right? Everybody should have the opportunity to be healthy. But what if somebody has the opportunity and they just sit there on the couch all day and they don't do anything? They eat like shit. They don't exercise. Their sleep is poor. They stare at screens all day. Is that person inherently deserving of health? The answer is like, well, it's kind of a
mhm.
hard argument. It's like, well, no, like, because that's an action, right? We have to view happiness the same way. How do we become deserving of health? We have to exercise, sleep well, and eat right, and do all the things, right? How do we become deserving of happiness? Or in the context of what we're talking about, this like healthier self, right? We have to do the things, right? So if the fear is that we're not going to be able to do it, it's not about not being able to do it, it's just doing
Yeah.
it, right? Because if we do the things, we will be healthy. If we do the things, we will be happy. And if we do the things, we will have a better relationship with
Mhm.
ourselves. So it's within reach for everybody, and that fear is, fear of change is super critical, and fear of failure is super prominent. But really just saying like, these are the standards now that I'm going to set for myself, right? My circumstances have dipped beneath those standards, and I have to work at it. I got to fake it until I
Yeah.
make it.
Yeah. Wow, that makes so much sense.
Yeah.
We're coming to end this conversation now. This is what I do, right? I'm talking to people about, the journey to healing from trauma and all of that. And I sometimes I forget to pause and like take a break. And you said something in one of your videos that left me going, "Ooh, that's so good." Um, you mentioned that a friend of yours reminded you that most of our problems will likely die of starvation if we just like let it.
Mhm.
Can you share that full thought with us and what your thinking is behind that?
Yeah, it's funny. I was listening to a podcast recently where somebody talked about this idea of the second arrow problem. Um, the first arrow being the problem itself, and then the second arrow being our interpretation or our judgment of the problem and its severity, right? And then I used that in session, and somebody asked me why an arrow, and I was like, actually, I have no idea. I didn't come up with it. I don't know, it was my idea. Um, but that sentiment applies to this in that a lot of our problems are just normal human experiences, right? And our interpretation of these problems can often make them much more severe and much more immediate and requiring a
Mm,
solution, right? Whereas, like, if I'm feeling insecure one day, that doesn't mean I need to act on it,
yeah.
right? If anything, no action can be the best action, right? If I'm feeling grumpy or irritable one day, that's a problem. But like if I start, there's a fine line between introspection and
Yeah.
self-obsession,
Say that again,
right?
please, please.
Introspection, there's there's a fine line between introspection and self-obsession, right? Introspection is being able to look in the mirror and take inventory, and then once it clears out, being able to walk away. Whereas self obsession is really just ruminating and spiraling and saying, like, why am I feeling this way? Why am I
Mhm.
feeling sad? As if feelings are not just responses to stimuli, right? Whether they're internal or external, they don't always need to be solved, right? Negative thoughts, yeah, we
Right.
all got them, right? We're always going to always get them, regardless of how healthy you become. We're always going to be sad. We're always going to be
Mhm.
angry and irritable and like these things are just natural parts of the human experience, and they don't always require solutions. So sometimes the best thing we can do when we're feeling that way is to just not fuck
Yeah,
everything up,
yeah.
and not make it worse than
Take a
it
nap.
needs to be. So the idea, absolutely, right? Take a nap,
Yeah.
go on a walk, watch some TV, like, just let it be, right? Because a lot of our problems will die of starvation, but if we fuel those and feed those too much to the point of self-deception, we're going to exacerbate the problems, and then second arrow thing is really going to come into
Oh,
effect.
that's so real, and that resonates with me so much, especially the walk thing. I'm always obsessed about solutions, and it's been years. I know the way this works for me. If I just take a nap and go for a walk, it comes to me. But I'm like, "Bah, bah, 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 bah,"
Mm-hmm.
like it comes to like I refuse to pull all nighters for anything now, whether it was school or anything. It's just like it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't work with my system. If I rest, I'd rather wake up early and figure it out than try to push through it. I don't push through anything anymore. So that definitely
Yeah.
resonates. Zach, this has been an incredible conversation. I know I'm walking away with so much, and I know our listeners are walking away with so much as well. Where can our listeners connect with you?
Oh man, Instagram and TikTok, that's really at the casual clinician, one word. I'm around, I don't have like a massive following, so the messages aren't going to get lost, like I should be able to respond pretty easily. Don't ever hesitate to say hi and reach out. And, I do a lot of traveling, so if I'm in your area, grab up, get a cup of coffee, go on a hike, and thank you for creating the opportunity for me to come on
Oh
and share
man,
these
no,
things that I'm passionate
this is
about.
great.
Yeah.
One of the things I'll say before we go, like um, being a man on this journey can be very lonely sometimes. To find like fellow
Hmm.
men that are in that same headspace, and that aren't, in the red pill like pipeline, to be honest. It's so
Hmm.
hard. Like
Yeah.
both
Yeah.
these groups think that like they're on this journey to, self-development and everything like that, but one makes you like more
Hmm.
angry and more, I don't know, at the world, and like to find this level of vulnerability,
Yeah.
this level, but not forsaken the idea of masculinity. It's been really a great
Mhm.
blessing to have you on here. Um, so thank you everyone for listening today, and thank you Zach for coming on. Our listeners, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment and share. And if you can go on any platform that you listen to your podcasts on, go ahead and give us a 5-star rating. I greatly appreciate that. And as always, remember that healing isn't the absence of shadows, it's learning to thrive in your own light. So rise today, rise tomorrow, and rise always, because the shadow doesn't stand a chance. Take care.
If you're an event organizer, HR leader, or educator looking to bring a powerful voice to your stage, someone who speaks truth, ignites momentum, and empowers your audience to rise above what's held them back, then I want to talk to you. My keynote, Rising from the Shadows, is more than a talk. It's a transformative experience that shows people how to stop shrinking, start healing, and stand fully in their story. I've lived it, I teach it, I walk people through it. So if you're building a lineup of speakers who don't just talk but move people, head over to marlonwesh.com to create something unforgettable for your audience.